starting at the end and working backward, the critical variable of launch. So we see Roger Clemens out here. As you can see, this is what we call late launch. It is way out in front of the front foot. There's his front foot about right there. So that's about 2 feet out in front of his front foot. And what we do see is we see a lot of amateur pitchers releasing the ball back here in the orange and the red. There's even some major league guys that are back in this area, although fewer and fewer. You're going to see most major league guys have kind of learned to have better command. They're going to have to be in this area, but this is really common. If you can imagine, here's an early launch, a young man with an early launch. See how far that's behind? And then we have King Felix here with a late launch. See how far out in front? You can imagine, if you're releasing the ball up here, where's that going to happen a lot? You're going to be high to your arm side, and then you're going to try to make an adjustment and have a posture change, and you're going to throw the ball down and you're going to spike a fastball. This is really common, early launch versus late launch. So even in professional baseball, here we have a right at launch. You see that is really kind of back here in back of the front foot, and then we have Roy Oswalt way out here. And then we have Scherzer with an extremely late launch way out there. You can see how the shoulders, all these are, their shoulders have released, have really rotated. And actually what you're looking at is the throwing side hip is going to be in front of the glove side hip, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And what you have here a lot of times is the hips are square, or actually the throwing hip is behind, and the relationship is closer to second base than the glove side hip, and that's going to be an issue. So going back to this diagram here, late launch is going to be critical to having a success from a command standpoint. So releasing the baseball more towards the red line versus the green line would of course make it more difficult to command pitches to the extension or the glove side. So for me to get a baseball to the extension side, I'm going to have to be, or the glove side, we call it either the extension side or the glove side, it's going to have to be out in here. So what contributes now? So that begs the question, what contributes to late launch, right? So there's some key things here. You see how the foot is now turned over here. And you see that he was not very far off the rubber here. He's really rotated off there. He's not gained a lot of ground. There's the edge of the rubber. You can tell that front hip is the throwing hip is slightly in front of the glove side hip. The thoracic spine is turned this way, and then you have your shoulder with this mobility that allows you to release the ball out. So the question is, how does the body unravel, organize itself? That's really crucial to be able to release the ball out here versus back in here. So the answer is everything affects or influences everything. So how this back foot, imagine if this back foot now is not turned over, well that is not going to allow this hip to go. When that hip gets over here, that's not going to allow the T-spine to rotate over there, and that T-spine not really going to here will not allow the shoulder to go. So it's kind of like a domino effect. Okay, so this affects this, and this affects this, and this affects this. So let's take an inside look at some elite throwers and see what we can see. So here's Nolan, here's Clemens, here's Maddox, there's Pedro, Scherzer, and Kershaw. So let's take a look closer now. I flipped Kershaw along from right-handed to left-handed, from left-handed to right-handed, so you can see it. What do you see from the foot here, from the foot here, from the foot here, from the foot here, and from the foot here, and from the foot here? That is an indication that the back hip has gotten in front of, the throwing hip has got in front of the glove side hip. And this happens over and over and over again. Now notice, it is a little different, right? But look at Nolan and look at Pedro. Look at the behavior of their feet is very, very similar. And that is, it's very indicative of elite throwers to achieve later launch. They've rotated their throwing side hip slightly past their glove side hip, allowing the T-spine and shoulder to unravel, work later as well. So the earlier that my hip has to unravel, then my T-spine, then my shoulder. The later, the more I can rotate one, then the later it unravels, and the more efficient my movement pattern. So once again, this affects this, this affects this, this affects this. So what happens is, if my hip rotation is minimized, trunk rotation is affected, and early unraveling and launches usually result. So a lot of times, young pitchers don't get so much out of their back leg for whatever reason, whether they don't ride their glute, if they counter-rotated. There's a lot of different things that create this or contribute to this, but the bottom line is now this hips are square at release. Well, that changes that orientation, so that T-spine is further back, and then the shoulder is obviously throwing back. So now we're releasing the ball here versus here. Well, now it even gets worse. If this is even more minimized, now the glove side hip is actually, I've seen this a whole bunch of times. The glove side hip is actually in front of, closer to the plate than the back hip. Then the T-spine doesn't work as well, and then the shoulder doesn't unravels earlier, and we're releasing the baseball way back in here. And that's the complexity of this thing. So as I mentioned before, the issue is very complex, right? That's a lot of moving parts. That's a lot of, and there's a lot of things that are going on that would contribute to this. Some seen, and I'm going to share those with you. Some unseen, some known, some we may never know. I've got to realize, all of us have got to accept that there are some things that we cannot see yet, some things we will never see. So I mean, 1993 is when I started. There's things that I see now that I never saw back then. And I'm sure that in 20 years from now, there are things that I'm going to see, kind of like the eye of the artist. You're going to start to see, be aware of it. And so you become better and better at seeing it. But there's some things I'm going to have to say that I will never be able to see. That's important to have that humility.
I lost you at this. I lost you for about...
All right, as I mentioned before, the issue before us is very complex. There's reason why, there's a lot of reasons why someone might have an earlier launch or later launch, and some of that we do realize, some of that we do know. I remember in 1993 when I first started, there were things that I could, that I didn't see then that I see now, and I think in 20 years there are going to be things that I see that I don't see now. So, but I have to also say to everybody, there's going to be things that I will never see and will never know about why these things occur. There's some humility that goes with this. But I'm going to address some of the possible contributors that are known in the athletic population that we work with at the Texas Baseball Ranch. And the first one is a constraint in ankle mobility. If this ankle is not as mobile, if there's a limitation, a constraint, well, of course, then that is going to affect that, which is going to affect that, which is going to affect that. So, a problem in ankle mobility can indeed affect the degree in which we have late launch. Then we have constraints in hip mobility. Sometimes our hips are just not as mobile as they need to be. Anytime we have a constraint, or especially around this front hip, that won't allow this rotation, we can, it'll stop us, and then obviously it'll affect that and that. Then we have constraints in thoracic spine mobility. Some people are just not able to get this turned as well. And when that happens, there's a limitation or a stopping point or a sticking point, and then our body unravels for there. And then sometimes it's a constraint in shoulder mobility. We have for whatever reason, we have a constraint in mobility of our shoulder, and then all of a sudden that does not work as well, and we're releasing the ball back here. So the truth is, all of this affects all of this. And what almost always happens, ladies and gentlemen, is a combination of ankle mobility, hip mobility, thoracic spine, and shoulder. A little bit of several of these things. It's almost never just really bad ankle mobility and all the rest is really good, or everything else is really good and it's just really bad shoulder mobility. It can be, but almost always it's a witch's brew of a lot of little things. And so we want to make sure, that's the reason we utilize a physical therapist to a large degree, and strength coaches that assess. We were always looking for, is there a constraint in these mobility issues. So now, then we go to inefficient movement patterns. So here are some things that would make it more difficult to have late launch from a movement pattern perspective. We have cross-acromial line. This is going to make it very difficult for us to get in a late launch. It's going to really encourage an earlier unraveling, and it's going to be very difficult to have late launch. However, I have seen it. I have seen people with really a cross-acromial line and somehow figure out a late launch. It is exceptionally rare, but I see it. My point is, the more that this is inefficient, the more difficult it is for the average person to be able to do that. And that's the reason we want to pay attention to it. Here's an inverted W, and then that's at weight. That's at just about weight-bearing heel plant. It's not quite down, but that's going to be very difficult for him to have late launch because he's got all that things going on, and now he has to get it out there at launch. That's going to be very difficult. We have an elevated distal humerus, which creates distance, and then that's going to encourage an earlier unraveling. A forearm flyout, which is one of the more common things in baseball, is going to create, it's going to be very difficult to have a late launch with this. We have a glove side that is inefficient, and it keeps us from rotating, kind of blocks us from rotating around. That is an issue. Or a glove side that's really just non-existent. It just kind of hangs around. Is going to be an issue. It's going to lend itself to an earlier launch. So any of these flaws is really going to contribute to earlier and earlier and earlier launch. What about counter rotation? Well, the more I rotate this way, there's only two things I can do. Either I unravel earlier, or I stride across my body, and then I have a posture change trying to get back on track. So that counter rotation is really a common contributor to earlier launch. The directional leg getting out of whack. Here's a posture change that is really going to create. If you notice, his feet look like he's throwing right at us, but if you look at his head, he's throwing that way, which means his body is throwing directly at us, but the plate is over that way somewhere. He's going to have to really correct. Well, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to consistently have later launch with that. Now, this is Jared Weaver, so he figured it out, but there was a cost to that. There's a lot of cost to the spine, lumbar spine, and groin, and that sort of area because of that. If you notice, his foot looked like he's throwing right at us. Then we have, here's Timmy Lincecum, and see how, really, if you counter rotate, you really have two choices. You do what Jared Weaver does, which is stride normally, like you're going to throw it in that direction because that's what your sternum tells you it is, and then you have a posture change to try to get back. Or you do what Timmy Lincecum did, which is really open up or swing open that front foot and correct that way. Well, that's also going to have some consequences to the low back and spine. So these are all things that contribute to earlier launch. Now, you might go, well, these guys, especially these guys, had great command, right? I mean, maybe not great, but they were certainly elite command because they're pitching in the major leagues. Yes, they're able to accommodate or modify their movement to create a result. I'm going to be talking about that in a minute, but there's going to be a consequence to that action, and that consequence is, as we both know, these two gentlemen don't throw near as hard as they did when they were younger, and it's not because of the stress on their arm, it's because they're stressed to the core, hips, and trunk that they were putting under. And really, by the way, this does not add to, when you take a look at guys like Ryan or Johnson or Clemens or Maddox, they did not have all this extra stress and torque to their spine and had a much more long career with much more consistent results. Now, it's important to note, a lot of people listening to this go, okay, I got it. My coach talked about extension. So that's it. You're talking about late launch, and really it's really extension. No, it's not. I know that, once again, I don't want to get caught up in word games, but I'm not looking for extension. I'm working for rotating into a late launch. That's completely different. I really believe this is type of movement pattern where you're just reaching and trying to hit a glove out in front. That's the reason we do not at the ranch nor do we recommend, nor do we endorse the traditional towel drill. We do our own towel drill, but it's not in our hand. It's out in front of us, and we're throwing the ball to hit it. We are not putting in our hand this way. This type of movement in itself, in our opinion, is a disconnection in itself. So we do not do that, and we are not talking about extension. I want to make that clear.